everybody. It's so nice to look out on this room and see so many of your faces. Some of them I get to see all the time. Some of them I hardly ever get to see. So welcome and thank you all for being here. I'm super excited to share with you some of our panelists' perspectives on the importance of writing as we all, both faculty and staff and students, all work to improve our writing throughout our lives, right? Like we're all still working on that. We're all still finding new challenges, new opportunities to do that. So I hope that the information that you share today will be inspiring or exciting or at least make you think a little bit as you continue to work on your projects here in undergrad and beyond. So I'd like to introduce to you Megan Grumbling, who is a writing specialist with the Student Academic Success Center.
Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for being here. Yeah, and as Professor Husman was saying, all of us are always working on our writing and evolving it, and so I'm really excited for all of us to hear a little bit about what these alumni and faculty are doing with writing in their real working professional lives. So HWOS and SASE have been partnering on some writing stuff beyond this, including some workshops on how to write really strong and competitive personal statements. So we are really interested in helping you guys with writing in lots of different respects, both in school and projected toward all of your futures. So I hope you'll come by and see us in our beautiful new space for any votes of confidence and other help that you want from us. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to you to introduce our beautiful panel.
All right. So today we have joining us Colin Bader. You know her as a professor in the Health, Wellness, and Occupational Studies program. She's an assistant clinical professor and internship coordinator for the UNE Health, Wellness, and Occupational Studies program. She teaches theories of health education and research methods courses, in addition to supporting HWOS students gaining internship experience at local organizations. Colin grew up in Maine and is a graduate of UNE's Master of Public Health program. While a graduate student, Colin completed interprofessional research projects regarding perceptions of health and identity with older adults and Somali immigrants in Portland. Her MPH capstone work focused on U.S. chemical control policy and impacts on human and environmental health. Thank you for being with us, Colin. Thank you. And next to Colin, we have Janica Barrows. Janica is currently living in Vinyl Haven, Maine, working as a pre-K teacher and working towards her master's in public health at the University of New England. Her current experience and love for children, she's decided that after she gets her master's, she's going to go back once again for a degree in elementary education. Ooh, what a nice combination. I'm excited. She plans to use public health and teaching as ways to improve children's health wherever she can. And she is a Health, Wellness, and Occupational Studies alum from 2 years ago, right? 2 years ago, great. And next to her, we have Megan McNearney. Megan studied HWOS until entering the graduate OT program here at UNE. She graduated from the UNE OT program last May with her master's degree and passed her boards over the summer while working as a camp counselor. She is currently working for a skilled nursing facility in Needham, Mass. Fun fact, she worked as a peer tutor for the SASE 4 out of the 5 years she was at UNE. And joining us remotely from Ohio, we have Anthony Frangione. Anthony is a graduate of the 2015 class of the Health, Wellness, and Occupational Studies program at UNE. During his time at UNE, he was a member of the men's soccer team, as well as a member of multiple clubs and organizations. It's possible he spoke to many of you during Accepted Students Day and encouraged you to come to UNE. After graduating, he elected to transfer to the University of New Hampshire to pursue occupational therapy, and recently just graduated this December. At UNH, he became a graduate assistant for 2 years under Dr. Vidya Sundar, hopefully I said that correctly, for the first writing-intensive course occupational therapy graduate students take at UNH, which focuses on interpretation and synthesis of evidence-based research. And finally, last but not least, I want to introduce you to Mihaela Gitsa. Mihaela is a senior in the Health, Wellness, and Occupational Studies program and is minoring in education. She'll be studying occupational therapy at UNE this May. Mihaela is captain of the gymnastics team here at UNE and is a part of various clubs on campus. She works as a youth and family counselor at Sweetser, and she will be acting as our moderator for our event today. So thank you to all of our panelists and to our moderator and to everyone else here. I guess we'll get started.
How you guys all doing today? All right, so let's start with the first question. So can you tell us briefly about a writing project or practice that's been crucial in your work? Professor Bader, would you mind going first?
Of course, thank you. Yeah, so as was mentioned in my introduction, I love research. I love doing research projects, and I've done a few specifically using arts-based research methods to work with older adults and also Somali immigrants, and to explore perceptions of health, identity, and things like that. So in order to kind of follow those passions and interests, you actually have to do a large research application and also a request for funding, like a grant proposal. And those are two of the most major writing projects that I've really ever worked on. So basically what you're doing with those writing projects is you're describing your proposed research study in a significant level of detail. You're really writing step by step how the study is going to unfold, all the way from recruiting your participants through analyzing your data. And so there's a lot of detail that's involved. It's very sort of technical, scientific type of writing. And so I would like to actually share a story from when I was in kindergarten, which I think was kind of relevant to writing this very long application. And so when I was in kindergarten, our teacher asked us to describe how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich as clearly as possible, step by step by step. And then she made the sandwiches following our instructions. And somewhere along the way, something went wrong in following the set of instructions. Either we forgot to tell her that the bread needs to be put together at the very end, or maybe we said put the peanut butter on the bread and she just put the jar of peanut butter on the bread. We didn't say you just use a knife to spread the peanut butter. Anyway, long story short, when I wrote this long kind of explanation of my proposed study, I really had to think carefully, step by step by step, and make it really clear for someone who didn't know what I was writing about. And the ultimate goal of this is to really convince someone that you plan it out super carefully and that it's a safe project for your participants, it's deserving of funding, and hopefully you get approval and you get funding for your research, which luckily, my team did as a result of just putting a lot of time and planning into that detailed description of our work.
Thank you. Jenica?
So unlike Colin, I was very a writing project. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. And kind of have to tell a story first. Upon graduating, I knew I did not want to be an OT. So I'm like, oh, okay, let's go to Germany for a year, see how that goes up. Did not go well. So I came back and I was in this limbo of my life. And I came and talked to lovely professors in the HWOS department. And I got geared towards public health. I'm like, oh, cool, this is awesome. I'm really gonna like it. And upon this, Professor Fortier offered me to help out with a grant, working with York County and building a substance misuse resource guide. And I'm like, oh, that might actually work for this talk that we're doing today. So we actually had to form focus groups, and a lot of students actually graduated last year, I think, helped out with this, and we had to build a website, which I think was a pretty big writing chunk that we had to do, and had to discuss so many different factors. Like we had to go out and meet people. We had to actually find resources of how to help with substance misuse, and it took a lot of work, and I think we put it together pretty nicely, but that was my aha moment of what I'm going to talk about with you guys today.
Thank you. Megan?
So I danced between a couple, but I decided to focus on something called a letter of medical necessity, which is something that I've had to write a couple of in my education to become an occupational therapist and career to be an occupational therapist. So what this letter is something that a therapist or any health profession might have to write that describes a client, their needs,
and a specific piece of equipment or service that is needed to improve their quality of life in some way. And so it's very specific. It's only like a page or two, but in that page or two, you have to accurately describe their condition, their abilities, their obstacles, the various aspects of the equipment that you're trying to get for them, and how this specific service or piece of equipment will benefit the patient and in what ways. So the first one that I wrote was actually on one of my fieldwork rotations. I was at an elementary school, and we had a young boy who had he had a birth defect that affected one of his legs, that he could not flex his knee at all, and it was significantly shorter than the other. So he had one of those big external fixators on and was lengthening his leg at the time. So we wrote up a letter, or I wrote a letter with the support of my supervisor for a hand-driven bike that would fit him, and he would be able to sit in comfortably with his leg how it was, so that he was in 4th grade. So he was a young boy. He wanted to go back out riding with his friends around the neighborhood, and he couldn't because of his disability. So we wrote up a letter for a local organization that gives out adaptive sporting equipment to kids with disabilities about this bike, and he ended up getting it. So
Thank you. Anthony, what are your thoughts?
All right, so just like many of you probably, I never thought that I was going to be involved in professional writing, that I was going to continue writing on a stage outside of undergrad. I only ever wrote about what was needed for assignments. I never did personal journaling. I never did things like that. However, when you got to grad school and when you were applying to grad school, you had to start writing in a different professional way, one that wasn't going to be graded subjectively for an assignment where you could argue between a B and an A or things like that anymore. It was more meaningful, and there was a lot more at stake. So for graduate school, like I said, I worked with, first I had to take that professional writing course that I was a TA and a graduate assistant for. I ended up doing pretty well, which led the professor to ask me to be her graduate assistant for the next 2 years. It was a paid position, which was quite motivating in that I could do a good job or not. I try my best every time to work with students to help them understand material, try to make it relevant to their lives and to their profession mostly. However, that position often would end in the spring because I had summers off at UNH and I would no longer be getting paid. So Dr. Sundar offered me a position to work with her as a research assistant over the summers. So just like Colin said, we did a grant proposal and an IRB submission, which was a process that was really enlightening for me to see. I hadn't been involved in that kind of professional writing before. However, there are various and multi-levels that you can be involved in a project like that. So for me, it was more learning about that writing process. However, my job as part of that process was more in the research. I was going out into the community, meeting with stakeholders and meeting with participants and trying to recruit in that sort of way. Ended up that we submitted our proposal. It was for job crafting, which for individuals with physical and cognitive disabilities, for them to find meaning in their workplace. We just found out after we submitted it 8 months ago, and in September, or I guess it was a year ago, and in September we found out we got a $600,000 grant over 3 years, which we'll be working on that, administering that, and working with individuals in the community over the next 3 years at UNH, which was pretty exciting, pretty rewarding. It was something I had forgotten about. I hadn't put a lot of effort in. And then 8 months later, it's just like, oh, wow, what you've been working on for the last year and a half is now real, and you have the funds to do it. It's not it's not a mystery. So the first writing that I had ever done wasn't for a grade, wasn't for reflection or anything. Now it was time to put it into action. So that was really my writing experience so far. And I look forward to doing more, which I would not have said when I graduated from the HWOS program.
Okay, so describe your writing process and the stages of writing for this project in reference to how long it is, how long it took, and about how many drafts.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so these IRB proposals and grant applications are, like I kind of alluded to, very detailed. So just to start, before getting too intimidated, I just started writing down ideas, just throwing everything on paper. Once I had them out and jotted down, I started organizing those ideas and trying to kind of sequence them in terms of how I would best explain this fairly elaborate research study I was proposing. It was a 12-week research study, and we actually had different plans for each session across these 12 weeks. We had to explain step by step what each of those weeks would look like. So kind of trying to get all my ideas on paper, sequence them, and once I had that outline essentially an outline and a concept map, I could start to write and really kind of follow the path that I'd set for myself. And I'm someone who doesn't just throw all the writing out there and then edit. I like to kind of tweak as I go, so I make sure that I'm staying on track and not kind of going down a rabbit hole or off on a tangent. So I would like write a few paragraphs and then reread it and do a little bit of tweaking and make sure I was kind of staying on course, and then I could course correct if need be midstream. And then sort of toward the end, when you have a good chunk of narrative out there, and for this project it was over 100 pages of writing. I planned out a lot of time so that I could do a really heavy editing process, because this is a high stakes type of writing. It gives you permission or not to do your research, depending on whether it seems to be safe and well planned. And it also gives you funding and justifies why you deserve to get that funding. So I took a lot of time just to reread. I read aloud. I printed it out and I took notes and scratched stuff off. When I'm editing, it kind of feels like there's like a perfect way to write something, or an ideal way, and I'm almost trying to discover that. I'm trying to discover how best to word something that's pretty complex. What's the most simple or clear way I could put this? So I kind of play with alternate versions of wording complex, topics like that, and try to find the clearest way to explain it. So I kind of find that fun, because it feels like a problem-solving challenge. But when it comes down to it, it does take a lot of time. So I think time in is huge, and just making sure you have the time to do that and put the diligence into that process.
Yeah.
So for getting our final project of a website, I think we started around the middle of March and ended up going until the middle of June. Thankfully, actually building the website did not take us as long as we thought, but we had to write some proposals, we had to do the focus groups like I was saying, so I'm going to focus on the writing of a proposal. And when I write something, I don't really follow an outline, make myself an outline, but I make sure I read the outline very, 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 very carefully, because I don't know how many times, like on papers that I've written for classes or something, I'll have this wonderful paper, and then I'll go back and look at the rubric, and I forgot like this huge chunk, and I just had to delete it. So I always make sure I read things through thoroughly now. And so then once I actually do that, I just start writing. I don't know, sometimes it happens right away, sometimes it actually takes me, I don't know, the time it takes me to clean my room because I'm deciding to procrastinate or something along those lines. But once I get those words down onto the paper, I can't really stop, which is really nice for me, because I can't go back, like do my middle section, then go back and write my introduction and my conclusion. I have to just go with it. And this allows a really natural flow for my papers, I think, and kind of just lets my personality shine in these papers. So I think that's pretty cool that I at least have that ability to do that. And then lastly, I really actually have to sit down and read whatever I write out loud, because there are so many times I've gone through and I'm like, what am I doing? Can I even speak English? Like, that makes no sense. And I can only imagine what would happen if I had sent in a proposal with, I don't know, am instead of and somewhere. Like, wow, I would not be doing my job correctly. So I really have to take that time to sit down, and whether it's I get the paper done right on time with the proposal and I do it the next day so I have a fresh mind, or if I, like I said, procrastinate, I'm not going to pretend I don't do that. I go through it right after I'm done, and I can really find a lot of things that I did not do well and have to go back and fix. So read your papers up on it.
Megan? Yeah, so for this specific project, it was only like a page and a half long, but it took me like 4 or 5 days to write because I was intimidated by the fact that like if I mess this up, this little boy might not get a bike. Like that was a little intimidating for me. So thankfully I had my clinical supervisor to kind of help me through the process. So she kind of gave me the key points of what I had to address in the letter. And then I went and I kind of word vomited onto a page, like all the different aspects that I knew I had to include, and then clean that up into an outline. And then like Janica, I have to write it all in one go and then go back and read it out loud. Because otherwise, if I'm just reading it silently to myself, I just kind of zone out and all of a sudden I'm at the bottom of the page and I didn't actually read any of the words that I've written. So if I read it out loud, I actually have to, I make myself think about it and review it. So I took like 2 or 3 drafts for this particular letter because I wrote it out, I edited it, I brought it into my supervisor, we read it together. She had some suggestions for specific kinds of wording to make it more convincing and all that, and then submitted it.
Thank you. Anthony?
All right, so Colin's was 100 pages, mine was 50. However, it was not all mine, and that's something I want to, like, it seems like it's, when writing professionally or doing these kinds of things, they can be very short or they can be something very long. But something they're not often is individualized. This is typically not only a one-person job. That being said, there are often many other people involved. So at least for me, I was working with about 5 other professionals, each with different, one was an occupational therapist, a couple were recreational therapists, and some were in mental health. And what was nice for me, because this was a first time thing, something I had never done before, they essentially held my hand throughout along the way. They gave me jobs that I could do, such as editing, going out in the community, things that I found meaningful and purposeful. And I let the professional write. I wasn't involved in the writing process at all. And it doesn't mean that you as aspiring professionals are going to be that lead person. You can be involved in the writing process in a number of different ways. And the skills that I learned through being that graduate assistant of synthesizing information, just looking to reword maybe in a way that I would say something, or understanding the target audience and writing for that target audience is something that is incredibly difficult. I know when I write first drafts, everyone's talking about drafts because there are going to be a lot of them when you do professional writing. Someone's going to say, I don't like the sentence, the entire thing doesn't work. They don't say, you just need to fix this and you'll be good. They say, you need to fix this and we'll see if we pass it the next time. I've always viewed writing as a really irritating thing in that it's not, and it's true, like for me, I was always really frustrated when I had to go back and edit my own work because I thought it was good enough the first time. When I wrote it, I thought my vocabulary that I used was fine. I thought that everything was good enough for the project at hand. And when it comes to professional writing, there's a lot more at stake than just what you're writing is being said. It's, like Colin said, it's going into that community. It's going into, can potentially change lives. It's going to be working with other individuals. So it needs to be perfect. And that takes a sense of, in a learning process for me, was that I had to accept that my writing wasn't, good enough wasn't good enough in many of the instances. And it could be better and my words may not be doing the job. So having someone else edit the process and work alongside me was difficult to let in, but it was definitely good to learn that style because it was something I had never done before.
Thank you. All right, third question. What writing skills have been most useful for you in making this writing effective? What has been most challenging for you in the writing process of this project, and how have you dealt with that challenge?
All right, thank you. All right, so some of my most useful, I'd say, skills, or even just call them habits, are also the things that kind of address the challenges that come up in the writing process. So a writing habit that I try to embrace is just not writing, but it's reading and the importance of reading. When I'm trying to write something, like when I was trying to write this IRB application and grant proposal, I read all kinds of examples. I read some stuff that my professors and colleagues had done. I read the research out there. I also like reading for fun. I just think the more you read, you start developing your own writing voice and you kind of learn the language of the writing. So that's a huge habit for me. Time management's huge. These types of writing, because they're high stakes and you're doing a lot of editing, they do take time. So just carving out that time to do it justice. I like to do the outlining, so you can outline the structure of your overall writing project, especially when it's a big project. If it ends up being 50 or 100 pages, having that kind of outline so you can keep a sense of the structure of what you're writing and the big picture. It's easy to get lost in the details when it's a big piece like that, and so the structure helps keep you oriented. One challenge is kind of the style of the writing, how kind of clean and clear and technical it has to be. Personally, I kind of enjoy sometimes writing creative writing, where you're doing imagery and imagination, and you're doing lots of sort of maybe fancy adjectives. But with this kind of writing, you're not doing any of that. You're trying to eliminate any unnecessary words, maybe fancy adjectives that don't need to be there. When I was in undergrad, I studied philosophy, and something my philosophy professor said to me always really stuck with me. He said, "You're writing about something complex. This is a complex thing you're writing about. Philosophy concepts are hard. Make your writing as simple, clean, clear as possible, so that the writing itself doesn't actually muddy up the concepts any more than they have to be." So I really try to embrace that and kind of read through my writing to make sure it's just clean, clear, concise, and I'm being intentional, about my word choices, so that the word choices I use don't actually make what I'm writing about even more confusing, for example. And then the last habit I want to kind of just emphasize is that importance of an extra set of eyes. For this research project, we were collaborating. People would read my work, I would read other people's work. And something might sound perfect in your own head. Oh, this makes sense. But then when someone else reads it, it's like, what are you trying to say here? And having that other perspective is really helpful.
Thank you. Jackie, what are your thoughts?
So what I kind of find most effective is if I don't really understand something or something's coming my way and I'm like, what is this? I message people that I know might know a little bit more than I do. So like when we were working on, I think, the needs assessment or something like that for the grant, I would shoot Professor Fortier a text and be like, what does this mean? Or I would run to your office and be like, I have no idea what's going on here. And we would sit down and explain it. Okay, got it. So something I didn't understand, if this was a paper for my undergraduate, I'd shoot my friends a text and be like, what do I do? If I would kind of get off focus, I would send them a text and be like, how are you guys writing this paper? Like, how did you get started? And I think that really helped push me along to have maybe that support, I think, is a really good way to put it. And just to know if you're struggling, there are people around you who can help you through it. And I guess that was also a challenge too. But for some challenges that I came across, especially with the substance misuse resource guide, was finding resources. I know I went into Professor Fortier's office and she had this huge packet full of them, and I'm like, how did you find these? I don't know what's wrong with me, but even when I go on to ProQuest Central or something like that, it takes me maybe an entire day to find resources that I want to use. And maybe I'm really picky, maybe I just do not know how to search for articles, but that's something I'm so challenged with. And I guess the only thing I can do there is don't get frustrated, and I have to just keep pushing through and doing that. And another challenge, especially with the grant, is kind of like what Anthony said, is I got really frustrated with health literacy. And we were making these questions for our focus group, and I came in with these 10 questions that I thought were awesome. I'm like, I worded these perfectly, like everyone's gonna love them. And the students that were working with us, they looked at it and they're like, is everyone gonna know what this word means? But what about substance? Like, does everyone in these focus groups, are they gonna know what the word substance entitles? And I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't they? Like, this is a great word. And they're like, no, because substance could include alcohol, it could include narcotics, it could include cigarettes and tobacco. We have to like be very specific and very clear cut on what we mean, because if someone in the focus group didn't understand what substance was, they were more likely not gonna participate because they didn't want to feel stupid or like they were the only person who didn't know that word. So that was really hard to get through.
Yeah, so I am not a natural writer at all. Very, very, very far from it. Writing is very hard for me. I lose track of my thoughts. I talk forever. I like write a whole paragraph when I only needed a sentence. Just very messy. So I have learned over the years to be very like clean cut with my process, especially like this particular letter. I had to be very precise, very concise, very like clean cut, get to the point. Insurance companies don't want to read a 5-page paper about a boy and his bike. So I have learned over the years I need that word vomit page to just get all my thoughts out there. And then I need to go through, clean it up, make an outline. Then I go through and write it, read it out loud to myself. And like they were saying, I need other eyes to read over it. I spent many, many hours in Sassy as an undergrad and a grad student, kind of working through all of my papers that I had to write. So just, I guess as far as writing skills, strategies that I personally need, I need to get all my thoughts out there at first, just get out there, then work on the organizing, then do some edits, reading it out loud. I have to do it, otherwise I miss more than half of my errors, and getting at least, hopefully, at least one person to read it, but I prefer like 2, maybe even 3 people to read over something for me before I submit it. Anthony?
All right, so first is, for me, writing wasn't something that I was honestly interested in. What I was interested in was when my professor proposed that this could be a paid thing, I could then go on and, that was my motivation, was I could get paid for writing and being involved in this project. However, once I was actually involved in the process, I had to be mentally involved. I couldn't just be doing it, sliding through, maybe like you did in some of your easier classes and just for various writing assignments. So when you start a writing process, find something that you're interested in, not for any external rewards, not for any payment or doing it for some financial means or anything, but do it because you want to do it. There's a reason I chose occupational therapy. I want to help individuals become as independent in their lives as possible within our community. And there's various ways that you can do that. I had to learn that I can still do that through writing. Writing, this way of writing, it may take longer. It may not have that immediate impact that you see in clinical practice, but eventually you can earn that through writing. And through writing, instead of impacting one person at a time like you do in the clinic, it can be 50, 100, 1,000 people through a research study. And those research that result from that study can impact even more and more individuals. That being said, once you find something you're interested in, find a place that you're interested in doing it. So there's got to be, maybe you don't work best in a library. Maybe you work best in a cafe. Maybe you work best in the Sassy. Maybe you work best in your bedroom. And then you need to organize yourself. So finding that research question, finding all of those materials that may or may not be relative, and in the stuff that you find maybe isn't relative, what pieces of that can you apply to your overall work? One of the big things I would advise my students at UNH was you need to let them read your project or your paper, whether it's a page, whether it's a essay that's your term paper, but make sure your roommate or that peer isn't involved in the project whatsoever. Do they understand your reading? Do they understand what you're trying to come across and what you're trying to say? And then let them edit it. They can then show you what's not as confusing, what's good, what they understand and what they don't. Also for big projects, and when you get into writing larger things, having a mentor, again, who's not involved in the project, because someone who has no involvement in the project isn't personally invested. That way they can give their honest and objective opinion on it all. What was challenging for me is when I would have someone go and critique me, it took me a while to step back and say, okay, I understand where they're coming from. I was never someone who liked my work critiqued. I also was someone who never really did that outline. I never benefited in my mind from doing that. It was just wasted time. And I was a crammer. So I also learned quickly, and that was probably the most challenging thing for me, was becoming that organized person who let other people into my work and let them critique it. And that's something that was hard, but it took some time, and I'm much more open-minded to people telling me what needs to be changed and what doesn't. So.
Thank you. All right, last question. What suggestions do you have for students looking to go into similar careers? Professor Bader.
All right, so a lot of what you've just heard, I think, in terms of the habits that we've found successful might be things to just think about considering embracing now as an undergrad, reading professional writing, reading for fun, where you're really, you're getting used to the language, you're getting comfortable with the vocabulary, getting a kind of practice with the editing process, the reading aloud so you can hear where, it breaks down, printing it out and kind of making notes on your drafts. That's something that I've always found super helpful. The concept mapping, the outlining, where you're really trying to see like what the overall big structure is of what your document, and then sequence it in such a way that it makes the most logical sense and kind of leads from one part to the next. Because if you think about it, at least for me, I find writing to be kind of unidirectional. You read from beginning to end. It only has one direction. It only flows one way. It's not like a painting where you can just kind of, your eyes will wander and you'll see all these different parts of it. You're kind of going from start to end. And so I really think a lot about how I sequence that information in the most effective ways for a reader who is totally unfamiliar with what I'm writing about. So I kind of introduce it, give them what they need to know to kind of figure out the rest along the way. And then, talk with others, talk with your peers, talk with friends. Writing is such a personal process. You're in your head, you're looking at your screen, you're having all this inner dialogue going on. But sometimes just talking about that whole process, because it's a detailed process, the process of writing. Talking about that with people. What's your process? Try to put words and try to describe your process. And then you can kind of compare and contrast and maybe get ideas from other people. And I think just getting into the habit of that technical, professional type of writing. As I said before, I really liked creative writing. I liked kind of poetic writing, imagery, fancy words. But for this kind of writing, it's just totally different. And you got to kind of practice getting a professional, formal tone, and then it'll just become more easier over time. Writing from the third person and kind of making it sound kind of objective as opposed to personal and reflective. So I think those are some of the biggest suggestions that have worked, at least for me, in developing my writing.
Thank you. Jacob?
What I'm going to kind of suggest is something I think is really overlooked, maybe is the right word, the word I'm looking for rather, and it's pound whatever citing format you need, like whether it's APA, AMA, MLA, into your head, because I don't know how many times I got a point, or there's a difference between an A and a B paper or something like that because I didn't cite right, or I used a citation maker and I didn't rely on my self-knowledge to go out there and cite the paper myself. And it seems silly, like, why should I not be able to do that? And I think most of you guys are probably writing in APA format, which you, after 4 years of it, you get really good at it. And all of a sudden I was like, yeah, I know APA format so well. I had to switch to AMA for public health. And I was like, I don't even know what to do here. Like, it's not even the same. And so I had to go through and use like Purdue OWL. I had to look up at my own resources online and just really focus on how to write AMA. And it took me maybe a month to just get that down to where I needed it to be perfect for citing all my sources. And so I don't lose points on something. So, I don't know the right word to say, but something so something so small, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So pound citing formats into your head. Know them, it's awesome.
Megan? I guess my biggest suggestion is to not shy away from opportunity and to try and find like opportunities for you now in your undergraduate, and if you choose to do any grad school, take that time when you have such awesome supportive professors around you to try and maybe get in on one of their projects or something. The first time that I wrote outside of what was needed for a class was on the Portland campus in the grad school program. One of my professors asked me to update and expand their chapter for the next edition of a textbook. And I was intimidated by it. Like I said, I'm not a natural writer. I tried to just stick with what I needed to do for class, but I said yes. And my professors were super helpful and supportive with my process of updating that chapter. And then at the end of it, my confidence with my ability to write was so much higher. And now that I'm in the working world, especially at a skilled nursing facility, the pressure to write more quickly and kind of be concise and more confident in my writing is much greater. I have to kind of move through quickly and get my thoughts down, edit and submit fairly fast. So that project with my professor and the textbook, being able to say that I wrote professionally and it got published and it all worked out well, really helped with my confidence, even though I had so much support doing it.
All right, so going off that, being open-minded and stepping out of your comfort zone are huge areas that you'll encounter if you choose to pursue any sort of writing. As what was just said, it's when you go to grad school, or if you choose to go on to grad school, even just after or while you're still at UNE, there are so many opportunities where individuals are involved in research, whether it's in the psychology department, whether one of your health, wellness, occupational studies professors is currently involved in something. You can, by stepping out of your comfort zone, asking, can I be involved in this process? Can I do anything, whether it's, can I join you at a meeting or sit in on something, just to learn a little bit more about how the process entails. It's not just sitting down and writing. And that was probably the hardest thing. One of the things that just deterred me from professional writing was that I just thought it was, okay, now I'm just going to have to sit down and write. And there's so much preparation and there's so many ways you can be involved in the writing process beforehand. When I got to grad school, it seemed like every one of my professors was involved in a research study or had just finished one, or was part of our classes were based off that. And if you are interested in one more than the other, if you are intrigued that, maybe there's one in the community that's a little more hands-on and that's how you can be involved in the process, just ask if you can be involved. You're not gonna, chances are the professors may not find you. It's it's up to you to go and find those opportunities. And in the meantime, if you're really not as motivated in the short term, just find something you're interested in, whether it's sports or maybe a new modality that just came out, or something that you just learned in an elective course that you're taking. Research probably happened to get that into practice. So go a little bit more in depth and read about it, and maybe that'll help you learn a little bit more and get you a little more interested. But there's chances are when you first engage in research, you're not going to be doing something you aren't interested in. So if you're involved in research, it needs to be first something that you want to do.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to do some Q&A. Does anybody have any questions for the writing panel? Anything? Oh, yep, go ahead.
What was probably your biggest mistake that you learned from in regards to writing?
Was she talking to me?
So your biggest mistake?
Yeah, the biggest mistake that you learned the most from.
I think for a while for me, I was trying to sound more kind of fancy and academic than I needed to, using big words, trying to sound smart essentially, and that just got in the way, got in the way of clarity, got in the way of connecting with my audience. So I really learned to kind of streamline and strip down my writing.
I would say my biggest mistake was not reading through the directions properly. And from this, I had to delete whole papers, and that hurts. So, I mean, now literally what I have to do when I write a paper is I split my computer screen into two. One side is my paper, one side is outline, so I can cross and make sure I have everything that I need to. Like, literally, if the question sometimes asks, like, what is your favorite color? I will type that, like, before I get it nice and neat. I'll see my favorite color is blah, blah, blah. So I know that I'm not going to make that mistake again, and then I can go back and not make it so black and white.
I guess in my professional writing was like taking it too fast when I was getting into a new style of writing. So as an occupational therapist and getting into that field when I was starting as a student, going in, evaluating a patient, figuring out everything about them, and then typing it up. And before I move on to my next patient, when I first started I was at an inpatient rehab hospital in Colorado for my first rotation. I would try to go in, get all my info, go back to the office, type it up really quickly to jump on to my next person to keep things rolling. And the first couple evaluations that I did, my supervisor reviewed them with me, and she was like, oh, like, you totally missed their home setup. Like, what does their home look like? I had just written like a brief sentence, like 1-story ranch house. But like, do they have steps to get in? Where is their bathroom? Do they have laundry? Is it in the basement? Like, there was a lot more detail that I needed to put in, and it was a new kind of writing for me. It wasn't the more academic writing that I was used to in school. So taking my time asking those questions about this new kind of writing.
And who writes differently depending on which teacher or which class they're taking? I certainly did. I would write very different for Carrie than I would for Karen, and I would write very differently for my English class than I would for my psychology class. So knowing your audience is huge. Professional writing can be writing to the insurance company, knowing that that's who you may assess and evaluate a client, or you may be working with someone. In order for your company to get paid, you need to make sure that it covers all the bases that the insurance company wants it to. Just like when you write that proposal, you're writing to the IRB, or if you're writing that professional English paper, or you're that professional research paper for one of your classes, you're writing based off that rubric for that teacher. So you need to know who your client is and who that audience is. And it's very easy to forget, and you're going to have to learn and just adapt some styles that you may have grown accustomed to over time.
Thank you. All right. I would like to thank you guys for coming. Thank you to the writing panel for sharing your stories. Do you have any other questions?